The question how good is Call of Duty insert name here is one that can really rile up the internet. It is a question that for many always seems to be black or white. It is either brilliant, best game ever, or dead game, utter trash. There's no in between. Now I tend to be quite sure of myself when it comes to forming an opinion on anything really, games or otherwise. Taking Call of Duty for example, Modern Warfare 2 is the best, Ghosts is the worst, Vanguard can be more 5 out of 10. Infinite Warfare had the worst multiplayer, but an absolute bang campaign, and I will continue to shout that from the rooftops. Now of course you could disagree with that, that's fine. The point is that on all of those I'm quite assured of my view and I have absolutely no doubt about it. But there is one Call of Duty that I just cannot put my finger on even to this day 7 years on, and that is Call of Duty Black Ops 3. Black Ops 3 of course was the ham in your jetpack sandwich. Activision saw the market going towards the future, which of course led to the trio of CODs beginning with Advanced Warfare and ending with Infinite Warfare. Now there can be absolutely no doubt that out of the three future settings, Black Ops 3 was comfortably the most liked. It was the only one of the three games that was already linked to an established sub-franchise. It had the sweet spot in terms of being able to develop on Advanced Warfare, while not being the third game that came out at a time where everyone was just utterly fed up with the setting and the gameplay. The game also had a lot going for it, as we will get onto. However, I've never been able to completely be on board with it. The best way to sum up the game for me was hit and miss. Some of it was utterly brilliant, and some of it was utter shite. Some of it was just confusing. In some ways it was one of the best, in others it was completely forgettable. So why is Black Ops 3 one of the most polarising games in the franchise? At least for me, you can all show your disgust at my opinion in the comments. As I've already touched upon, the game is generally quite well liked. A lot of people look back on it as like the last great Call of Duty game. It sold brilliantly. Its player base remains solid way after the following games were released. I've never quite understood it. But why? So, first things first, gameplay and the overall mechanics. Now Advanced Warfare of course, the year before, is what brought the futuristic setting and movement to the franchise. And I don't necessarily dislike Advanced Warfare, but equally it wasn't my favourite, and at the time I was hopeful that this would just sort of stay unique to Sledgehammer Games, considering it appeared at the time that they were going to go rather balls deep with the story and the narrative of Advanced Warfare. Gotta say that quickly, it's fucking difficult. So when Black Ops 3 was announced to be yeeting itself into the future also, I was already a little bit disappointed. It wasn't something I wanted year round. I didn't want another game with jetpacks and robots all over the place. In fairness to it, at least Infinite Warfare took the bullshit to space to make it a little bit different, and granted it felt nothing like a COD game, but still. There was of course the addition of wall running, which had a slightly different dynamic to it, but overall it just isn't something I really wanted at the time. Looking back at it though, it is clear that for what it was done well. Just because I wasn't a fan of the concept as a whole doesn't mean I don't accept that Treyarch did a good job with it, which is ultimately why the game did so well and was so well liked. Also, it is worth pointing out that with zombies generally in a completely different time, the game did still have a degree of boots on the ground, with occasionally some little gimmick to bring in wall running for example. Ultimately, the gameplay was a key factor to my view on the game, but it's the modes where I just don't know where to think, I really don't. First things first, the campaign. Now I know this won't probably matter to everybody, it's the least relevant mode to making a Call of Duty game successful or having any longevity, but for me, the campaign is the first point of call when the game comes out. Always has been, probably always will be. It's the first point where I'm introduced to the game, and that may have been the reason as to why I could never fully get behind Black Ops 3. Because, well, the campaign was a bit nuts, and sadly not in a good way. Playing through the campaign again, even now, I just don't get it. I really don't. It feels completely unstructured and really unnecessary, and it adds nothing to the overall Black Ops series. There is just one slight link to the previous games in the sense of Nova 6, but that is pretty much as close as it got. Now obviously sequel stories do not need to explicitly follow on from previous ones, they can move on, be unique and go in different directions. But to be that separate from the previous games was just a bit odd. Now Black Ops campaigns always try to be mind benders, they don't want to be clear cut and they want to keep the player guessing. Black Ops 3 did continue with this trend of causing outright confusion, but it did so in a way that it just did not get it right. As I say, the confusion element has always been there, always. However, unlike the numbers in Black Ops or the butterfly effect set up in Black Ops 2, Black Ops 3 campaign is just confusing. There's no payoff to it, there's no real satisfying revelation or ending that makes what happens one clear or two satisfying. So, to sum up the campaign, It's based in 2065, 40 years on from Black Ops 2, and sees you, the player, getting absolutely mauled to shit by a robot. What a fun start, eh? This also reminded me of the fact that the playable character was customisable but unnamed. Bit odd. Following on from being utterly dominated by a robot, the player undergoes cybernetic surgery to save their life, and gets installed with a direct neural interface or a DNI. You go through some virtual training, only notable for the train go boom moment.
Train go boom.
Most of the campaign plays out in a very similar and somewhat samey fashion, with no real change from mission to mission. Obviously, Call of Duty campaigns often follow a similar pattern, some all-out war missions, some stealth, some breaching, some clearing, you know how it goes. Black Ops 3 though, really felt as it wasn't doing anything unique from mission to mission. It's a lot of gunning down, just with some robots thrown into the mix. Taylor, who trained you with the train going you know what, defected with his team. Turns out his team was infected with something called Corvus, intelligence that was intended to monitor thoughts of those with a DNI. Remember those? You with me? Good. Said Corvus made them obsessed with a forest. Yep, a forest. It's exciting. The player and Hendrix, your little buddy, have also become infected with it. Having betrayed you, Taylor resists the Corvus and tears his DNI out to spare the player. That's good one. A former ally turned good. But now Hendrix is a former ally turned bad and shoots Taylor, so nothing really changes. What's the point, eh? You then have to kill Hendrix and then yourself. End of story. Oh, no, isn't? Here's the forest. Are you dead? Are you not? Nothing really matters anymore. Turns out you're not dead, Taylor isn't dead, and they end Corvus. At the end, the player names himself to the security forces as Taylor. Curious. Turns out you were dead and died ages ago during the cybernetic surgery that we talked about. Remember that? It's a simulation and based on the experiences between Taylor and Hendrix. Now, I scripted that in a way that was purposefully facetious and to make it even more confusing, but that's to make the point. When you play this, you don't have a clue what's going on. But as I've already pointed out, Black Ops campaigns aren't there to be clear cut, but there has to be some sort of payoff, and Black Ops 3 has none. Characters you don't care about, a storyline so convoluted with gameplay, so repetitive. And as much as I can understand what they were going for, the player thing just makes the character forgettable. Roach never said a goddamn word in Modern Warfare 2, but his identity as Roach was enough to make him stick out. Again, the campaign ultimately doesn't really matter in terms of how the Call of Duty game is perceived. But that does not mean it is not worth stating the mess of it. Black Ops 4 would come out without a campaign, and as much as they said there was an intention for one, I can't help but feel like the Black Ops 3 campaign was part of the reasons as to why 4 came out without one. Both for it being ultimately a poor campaign, and 2, for there being a lack of anywhere to really go with the Black Ops story, certainly in the future at least. Cold War, of course, did have a campaign, but it was a prequel, and to be honest, that one wasn't overly brilliant either. But moving on to what most people ultimately care about, the multiplayer, which is certainly where the view on the game really does blur for me. Nowhere was the movement system exploited and outright spammed quite like it was in multiplayer. As I've already hinted before, it wasn't really my cup of tea. There can always be an argument that this is the player base more so than the game itself, which is true, and in fact to this day I tend to get more infuriated by players than I do the actual game itself. But it is a mechanic there, and a key one at that, which made the playstyles and general flow of the game feel quite infuriating to me. Having spent the previous year tolerating Advanced Warfare, I wasn't sure I could cope with another year of this crap. This in turn would make Infinite Warfare's multiplayer virtually untouched by me, as my apathy hit the ceiling. You then of course had the heavy heights of the supply drops at this time. Now it was done slightly better than it was in Advanced Warfare, with Advanced Warfare as a rare crap that you could supposedly earn. But supply drops were still rather unpopular with many, and they kept their controversy even after Black Ops 3, even when they were done in possibly the best way for Infinite Warfare and Modern Warfare Remastered. But it cannot be argued that the game didn't flourish in many ways. Content-wise, it was incredibly well looked after by Treyarch, and we'll get into more detail on that later. It was backed with support and new stuff not just during its cycle but long after it, thanks to just how popular it continued to be whilst future games stumbled. In fact, the game was quite well polished throughout, and Treyarch did ensure the game stayed as balanced, fun and ultimately unbroken as possible, a far cry from these days where Warzone glitches remain throughout its life. For what it was, multiplayer was done incredibly well, no matter what my view on it was, it cannot be denied. Even looking back at the maps too, now this is going back a while so I could be wrong, but I can't remember too many bad or outright terrible ones. There was not a, underpass or Stonehaven, for example. The game's maps were all built to try and make the best of how the game was played. and for the most part they did that pretty damn well. The guns and overall gunplay were quite well balanced, Bresci being one of the few notable exceptions to that, and most of the guns were fun to use. Occasionally with past Call of Duty games there has been a problem where a few select guns become the norm, and that's just the ones that 99% seem to stick to. Again, the blame for that could be put at the door of the players, but Black Ops 3 did have a range of decent to use interesting weapons. The multiplayer mode was strong and was well looked after, and some limited time modes or new maps through DLC meant I did revisit the game quite often. I really wanted to like it massively, but I never did manage to shake off the dislike I had for its mechanics. Ultimately though, it was the third mode that managed to fully redeem Black Ops 3. I'm of course talking about zombies. While the rest of the game was hit and miss, zombies in Black Ops 3 was practically perfection, or at least as close as you can get to it. I grew up loving zombies mode with a passion, and I discussed this more in an earlier video I did on this channel, which was mainly done to bitch and moan about the state it's in on Vanguard and to a certain extent Cold War. Be sure to check this out after this video. As I briefly mentioned when discussing multiplayer, content was constantly provided throughout and after its cycle, and the best example of this was of course Zombie Chronicles, which remastered old school maps from all the previous games, from Natch to Kino, from Ascension to Origins. In fact, when all was said and done, there was 14 maps that you could play on Black Ops 3. You had Shadows of Evil and the Giant from the off, you of course got the 4 DLC maps, and then there were the 4 World at War maps, 4 Black Ops maps, and Origins from Black Ops 2 thrown in there. Now, not only was there quantity, but there was quality. You know what you're getting from the remakes of course, but even the unique maps all played very well. The only one I could say that wasn't too great was Zetsubo in my opinion. I even enjoyed Revelations, albeit it didn't connect with some out there. But it wasn't just the maps, it was the perks, it was the wonder weapons, the implementation of the wonder fizz, the easter eggs, the boss fights, and the story as a whole. It just all made the mode that bit more fun compared to the previous 3 games, which is no mean feat considering how good they were also. We of course also had Gobblegums, which were a new addition, and again I liked them massively, and I know some people didn't, as they found Gobblegums to be slightly overpowered, looking at you, Perkaholic. But it was something that was very easy to just not use if you didn't really want to. For the most part, they were just small enhancements, with some not so small. You could also pick the 5 you want available, which really did tailor it to you. So if you wanted to be an absolute Chad, you could just bin off Perkaholic because you're just too good for that. For the first time, there was also a proper bespoke to zombies levelling system, separate to multiplayer, which is something I had always wanted from zombies. This was also present for the campaign, but let's face it, who really cares? It also showed a fairly good representation of where my heart was when it came to Black Ops 3. I played zombies all the time on it. I'm not even one of those players that particularly cares for the Easter egg crests and things like that. Someone else can always do that. My fun simply came from playing one of the maps and going for as long as I could round-wise, like the good old days. Once I died, I'd just pick out a new map and go again. Black Ops 3 really was the peak for zombies, as I mentioned, pretty much perfection. You can really see how it built up to that point from the games previous, and sadly, you can see where it has fallen from Black Ops 4 to Cold War and now with Vanguard. I covered the rise and fall of zombies in my first zombie related video, which I've already plugged, so shamefully throwing it in there again. So I'll move on from this and once again point you into that direction. Without zombies, there would be a good chance that I fell away from this game not too long after New Year's. I can pretty much prove this point with Vanguard this year. Didn't overly dislike the game, it wasn't great either, its multiplayer was okay without being spectacular. Vanguard of course also has zombies, but its iteration of the mode was incredibly poor, and without it being at a good enough standard, I've long since stopped playing Vanguard. That could have happened with Black Ops 3 if zombies wasn't as good as it was on there, really could have. Zombies changed the perception of Black Ops 3 completely for me. And that is why, despite my somewhat negative views on other parts of the game, I still make sure I will always have it downloaded, now on my PS5. And if I have a craving for any zombies, it tends to be my go-to. Heck, even if I wanted a well-balanced multiplayer, that would probably be my go-to as well. I'd get frustrated really quickly, but still, in terms of balance, that's probably the last great Call of Duty multiplayer. Overall, I still don't get the overwhelming love for this game, and I don't think I ever will. It's also worth noting something I haven't mentioned yet. It was the rather mundane, to put it lightly, effort to port the game onto the PS3 and Xbox 360, which was so poor it utterly made it pointless. It had no campaign, which in fairness is actually a blessing. It also took forever to get any form of DLC in the form of the Giant Zombies map. It looked horrific, worse than some previous games on that platform. Basically, if you're going to release a game on an older platform, but it needs significant dumbing down, maybe consider not bothering it instead of instinctively deciding to rip people off. But getting back onto the version that they didn't leave in the dumpster fire, I still have to appreciate elements of it. and with its top tier zombies mode, despite all the issues I have with it as a game, it probably will always be stored on my PlayStation and played for years to come. So is it one of the best? Probably not for me. But it ultimately seemed to get something right for everyone. For many, the multiplayer was fun and enjoyable. For me personally, it wasn't particularly, but it made up for it massively elsewhere. Ultimately, the question in the title is pointless, and it doesn't matter for shit. People enjoyed it, at least in some capacity, and so for that reason, Black Ops 3 will always be positively remembered. Not the campaign though. The campaign can get to fuck.